Hello, everybody. This is Jennifer Schaus, and thanks for joining us in our Get FAR Cited in 2020 webinar series. Today, we're joined by Frank McNally of Public Spend Forum, and we're going to give you a brief overview of what's to come for next year. We're going to cover the FAR, which is the Federal Acquisition Regulation. It's more or less the rule book and procedures and policies for how the government purchases at the federal level. Our webinar series will cover each part of the FAR each week, and they're all complimentary and recorded. Our sponsor for the program is Open the FAR, and we'll talk about them a little bit later and share some links which will be helpful to you in understanding and citing the FAR. But a quick blurb about us. We are based in downtown Washington, D.C., and provide professional services for U.S. federal government contractors. The services listed there on the screen that you can see range from contract administration, business development, to GSA schedule assistance. Our clients are large businesses and small, domestic and foreign, and they span from product companies to service companies as well as software firms. So if you need any help with any of these services, please contact us directly. Contact information is listed there on the bottom of your screen. So as I mentioned, this FAR series that we are launching in 2020 will be on Fridays at 12 o'clock. These are all complimentary and recorded. We're going to post the recordings on our website. There's a specific section for the FAR series. We will post them on LinkedIn and also on our YouTube channel. We still have openings for additional sponsors, so if you are interested in participating as a sponsor, please contact us at the hello@jenniferschaus.com email address. Okay, so we're very lucky to have Frank McNally with us. He's with Public Spend Forum. His contact information is here, and he's going to be our presenter today as well as for the first two parts next year, which is obviously just a couple weeks away. So what I will do here is turn the floor over to Frank, and it's all yours. Thanks for joining us, Frank.
Well, thanks, Jennifer, and thank you for having me. I think it's awesome that you've fully booked this particular webinar. Such enthusiasm for the Federal Acquisition Regulation is kind of neat for a contracting nerd like myself, and all of you will understand the depths of my federal contracting nerddom as I go through this, but just a little bit about myself. Jennifer mentioned I do work for Public Spend Forum. We're a market intelligence and supplier research platform. We help connect buyers and suppliers in the public sector. One of the ways we do that is with our market research platform, GovShop, which is free to use. You can search. It's basically a market research tool. You can find contractors. You can look up product services codes. If you're a contractor and you want to get found by more government buyers, we recommend creating a free profile on govshop.com and claim your business and add information that's relevant to contracting officers when they're doing market research, in accordance, of course, with Part 10 of the Federal Acquisition Regulation, which I imagine that'll be closer to April or maybe March by the time we're doing that course. So I mentioned I'm a federal contracting nerd. I spent 4 years as a contracting officer with the Transportation Security Administration, and then an additional 5 years teaching and developing a curriculum for the Department of Veterans Affairs Acquisition Intern Program. If there's anyone on the course that happened to be in the classroom with me, I hope you're doing well. I hope that what we were able to impart in those years at the Academy in Frederick has helped you on your way. But that was a really great time, personally and professionally for me, because I had operational experience with contracting, and then I got to teach and develop curriculum and also serve as a management consultant. So I was on the other side of the things that I was doing as an 1102 contracting officer. I was in receipt of those actions, and so it was really neat to see from the other end how some of the decisions I had made in my prior career actually impacted what I was doing in that career. And I think for anyone who's considering, any type of career diversity, if there are rotational programs that can allow you either to go work for a company or vice versa, go in and get some experience inside government contracting, it's really helpful to know what happens on sort of both sides of the aisle. Like I say, if you eat in restaurants a lot, you should definitely be a waiter for a little while, and you'll come away with an appreciation for what everybody kind of experiences. So real quickly, let's go to the next slide and talk a little bit about what the Federal Acquisition Regulation is and why it exists. As you probably know, the Federal Acquisition Regulation sets the basic policies and general information for government contracting. The discretionary budget, $500 billion a year in discretionary funds run through FAR contracts, largely. Obviously, if you're with the FAA and you do acquisition management systems, so it's slightly different, but it's definitely born of the FAR. So the FAR itself is codified in the Code of Federal Regulations. It's Chapter 1, Title 48, and it's structured in subchapters, parts, subparts, sections, subsections, paragraphs, and subparagraphs, and you can really go all the way down to subparagraph levels, and it makes the FAR kind of a neatly codified system. If you've spent a lot of time flipping through it, it's probably a situation where it started out as a bit of a maze, but the more you work within it, the more you learn the structure, the easier you found it to navigate it. So, like I said, the Federal Acquisition Regulation codifies and publicizes uniform policies and procedures for acquisition by all executive agencies. So it's basically kind of exists to make a standard for discretionary spending. Obviously, I recognize there's internal policies and procedures at agencies. We'll talk about supplemental regulations in a couple slides here. But for a legal framework, covering $500 million in spend, it's useful to have a federal acquisition regulation against which, the majority of contracts will be executed. And so that's kind of what's talked about a little bit too in the Statement of Guiding Principles. And this will be, in our Part 1 delivery here in early January, but I think it's worth talking about now. It does exist. The federal acquisition system is all about delivering on a timely basis best value products or services while maintaining public trust and fulfilling public policy objectives. So it is an expansive system. It is meant to govern contracts, but it's also meant to, enable outcomes. So if you go to the next slide, that's why it exists. So how is the FAR put together? And I mentioned earlier, huge federal contracting nerd, so much so that about 4 years ago, maybe even longer, I can't remember when I conceived of this idea, but I was dissatisfied with the online regulation. I felt like there should be a better way to read and navigate the FAR online. For a long time, we had the FAR site, which was maintained by Hill Air Force Base, and we've always had acquisition.gov. But those are things that can be improved on. Unfortunately, the Hill site was retired in September. And so it's a nice time to talk about the platform that I've developed, which is openthefar.com. It is the FAR. We take it from acquisition.gov. We apply some modern user experience and modern design principles, hopefully to enable a easier regulation, easier to find, easier to read, and easier to understand. So you can go to openthefar.com right now and see what we've developed and see for yourself. And if you feel like it's a useful tool and it's something that you want to bookmark, that'd be awesome. We've got a new release coming out definitely before the end of the year that'll enable you to take notes in the FAR. I remember my paper FAR back in the mid 2000s had all kinds of notes, Post-its or whatever, dog ears, all kinds of things in that. So I kind of wanted to make that a part of Open the FAR. We'll also be permitting annotations. So case law, we'll have and invite people who've more expertise than me to come in and annotate certain sections that are traditionally difficult to understand, so that you kind of have that ask a professor sort of situation there with the annotations. But let's talk a little bit more about how the FAR is structured. So there are 8 sub-chapters, and you can see them here on the left of the screen: general, competition and acquisition planning, contracting methods and contract types, socioeconomic programs, general contracting requirements, special categories of contracting, contract management, and clauses and forms. It's useful to know how the FAR is divided, and how the parts are mapped to each one. So in the first 4 weeks of our course, Get FAR Cited, we'll be covering the first 4 parts of the FAR, which are part of subchapter A. Part 1 is the Federal Acquisition Regulation System that includes an absolute must-read for anyone who's new to acquisition and wants to understand your flexibilities as a contracting officer and trusted business advisor. Of course, I'm talking about the Statement of Guiding Principles at section 1.102. Also included in subchapter A is part 2 of the FAR, which is definitions of words and terms. You will find yourself referring to part 2 quite often, because there are certain words in the FAR that have meaning beyond what you'll find in Webster's dictionary. And so it's very important in contracting and in the development of our contracts and in the enforcement of our contracts that we understand how words and terms are defined by the FAR. We've got a great blog on this on openthefar.com, which you can get to from the blog. But the most important thing to know here is that when a word is not defined in a particular part, because each part in the section will have its own definitions, then you are to use the definition of the word in part 2. If it's not defined there, then you got to go to something like Black's Law Dictionary and find the definition there. Subchapter A also includes a very important part, which is part 3, improper business practices and personal conflicts of interest. You'll want to read that and understand what constitutes improper, what constitutes unethical behavior. It's nothing that you might not be surprised of if you're familiar with business ethics, but something good to always read. Then there's some administrative matters in part 4 that's kind of good to be aware of. As we proceed through the course, and this is also something I enjoy about the FAR and the way it's laid out, is that as you go from sort of the general subchapters, on through subchapter C, it kind of follows the acquisition process. In subchapter B, competition and acquisition planning, are 7 parts, starting with publicizing contract actions. So if you've got a solicitation and you want to get proposals and receipts to that, you have to publicize it. Part 5 tells you how to do that. Obviously, any type of public competition or public contract action is going to have competition requirements. That's covered in part 6. And you should be thinking about all of this as you're doing acquisition planning. There are some requirements in acquisition planning in part 7 that have probably made their way into your acquisition plan templates, into your policy guidance, into all that. But part 7 is a great part to read because it really tells you how to prepare your contract strategy and how to prepare to make a contract award. It's a very good formula. Part 8 deals with required sources of supplies and services, very relevant to you if you work at an agency like Department of Veterans Affairs. You have an entire schedule of medical supplies and services. You can't just go out and buy, cotton swabs off Amazon. You're actually required to use, I think it's 65-2B, Schedule 65-2B, but don't quote me on that, but I think it's that. That's a required source of supply. There's also required sources of supply like NIBNISH, National Institute for the Blind. So those are very important vocational programs. If we can use them for commodities or basic services, we're encouraged to do so because the FAR has public policy objectives included in it. Part 8 also includes, requirements for sources of supply like the GSA schedules. If you're intending to buy off the GSA schedules, you're going to see that in subpart 8.4. Contractor qualifications in Part 9, that just sort of talks about responsibility, who can, who being what vendors, what contractors, what must they fulfill in order to enter into a contract with the federal agency. Part 10 deals with market research, something we're very intrigued by and very, we want to promote good market research tactics on behalf of what we do at Public Spend Forum and GovShop. We think market research is crucial to achieving public outcomes that are good not only for the government, but good for the suppliers and good for the citizens. Describing agency needs in Part 11, that talks about requirements development. That's where you kind of understand the difference between a statement of work and a statement of objectives, or a formal requirement and a technical requirement. So Part 11, that's definitely one I'm going to be tuning into. I'm all about solicitation design, all about writing good requirements that describe the agency needs in a manner that also promotes competition, because that's another big part of the FAR system. Part 12 deals with the acquisition of commercial items. I'd say 85% of what we buy is a commercial item nowadays. So Part 12, you're gonna live in Part 12 quite a bit, and you're probably gonna have some questions about how Part 12, relates to some of the parts that you'll find in subchapter C, which is contracting methods and contract types. We start there in Part 13 with simplified acquisition procedures. Yeah, so Frank, how do simplified acquisition procedures work if I'm buying commercial items? Well, I think that's going to be discussed. Sealed bidding, something in Part 14 that you might do if you're in construction. Sealed bidding is a bit of an old school method, celebrated by a lot of the folks that I used to work with in the government, who would talk about the days of sealed bids, where you would literally get in the room and you'd have these manila folders, and you would open the envelope and that contractor's bid would be right there. And it could be big time facilities development or construction project, and it was pretty intense, because in a sealed bid you get one shot. What's on the paper is what you're putting forth, and if it doesn't win, it doesn't win. Part 15, contracting by negotiation, is different than sealed bidding, because with a contract by negotiation, the government reserves the right to go back and negotiate with the vendor. They can actually, find somebody that's in the competitive range, decide to hold discussions with them and try to get a better deal. So contracting by negotiation, Part 15, that's a beefy section. That is a beefy section. You're talking about uniform contract formats. You're talking about very formal procedures. Very different, on the opposite end of the spectrum from simplified acquisition procedures, but probably my favorite part of the FAR, because if you can understand Part 15, you can do pretty much anything in federal acquisition. Part 16 describes our types of contracts, everything from cost plus, award fee, to fixed price incentive fee, and then I think actually, I don't think it discusses award terms, but there's some read-ins there that people can look through. But anyway, Part 16 is where you're going to go if you want to know the difference between an IDIQ and a requirements contract. Part 16's got it. Part 17, special contracting methods, and Part 18, emergency acquisitions, are definitely something that you may experience as you progress in your career if you're not already dealing with it right now. And then socioeconomic programs is subchapter D. So here's where we talk about small business programs in Part 19. Obviously, public procurement, this discretionary budget that we have, we'd love that to go towards economic development. The royal we, of course, our government. So that means, we'd like some of that spending to go to small businesses. And if you're working in an agency right now, you probably know what your small business goals are. You probably know whether or not you hit those goals last fiscal year. If you're a contractor and you're a small business, you know how you can position yourself to take advantage of the small business programs. Parts 20 and 21 are reserved. I call this the Bermuda Triangle of the FAR. I'm sure someone with more experience than me can tell me what used to be there, but in my mind, it's just a big gap. That's a little bit tongue-in-cheek. Part 22, application of labor laws, government acquisitions, Service Contract Act stuff. You're gonna get involved in that if you're in a big services contract. Part 23, it deals with environmental and efficiency, renewable energy things, occupational safety, drug-free workplace. You're going to see these types of clauses pop up in a lot of contracts. Tends to be boilerplate most companies, but if you are a contractor and you're subject to some of these, you want to pay attention there. Part 24 is about the Freedom of Information Act and protection of privacy. Part 25, foreign acquisition. And then Part 26 is other socioeconomic programs. That's where our hub zones and our set-asides and our SDVOSBs get discussed. I'm going to speed it up a little bit here. Part E, general contracting requirements, deals with a lot of things like patents and data rights, bonding, taxes, cost accounting standards, which are never going to be relevant to a Part 12 commercial acquisition purchase, cost principles, contract financing, and then an important part, 33, protests, disputes, and appeals. I'm sure nobody ever here has thought about protesting a contract that they didn't win. Obviously, we know that doesn't apply for Amazon and what's happening with the JEDI contract right now, but that's probably the most famous protest case that's happening right now. And likely making some contract attorneys quite a nice Christmas bonus. Subchapter F, special categories of contracting. Again, feeding through, say, major systems acquisition, Part 34. Any of our DoD folks out there, this is a really important part for you, Part 34. I'll tune in for that one too. That's not my expertise. I've only done civilian contracting, but the DoD contracting world's quite fascinating. You've got research and development contracting in Part 35. Definitely, we are testing the boundaries there with some new types of contracting that are coming out of R&D. You won't find OTAs in here, but similar. OTAs are non-FAR procurements, other transaction authorities, but they're kind of related to research and development contracting. Part 36, construction and architect engineer contracts. If you are in construction contracting, this is your Part 36. Part 37, service contracting. If you're buying a lot of labor, if you're buying staff aug, if you're buying services, Part 37 is relevant to you. Part 38, federal supply schedule contracting, GSA. Contracting professionals know this part quite well, as do VA acquisition professionals that work in the Veterans Health Administration. This is where they're spending a lot of their time. Part 39, acquisition of information technology. Small chapter for something that governs something so critical, but the FAR was written in 1982. IT back then was, I'm pretty sure that was desktop computers and maybe some modems here and there, but now it's entirely different. Now information technology, includes digital service delivery. So Part 39 is an interesting read. It talks about modular contracting, which is sort of how we're attempting to navigate the agile development and agile services delivery by lumping it into modular contracting. So Part 39 is an interesting part. Part 40 is reserved. Part 41 is the acquisition of utility services. So that's public utilities, things like that. So if you're buying, power or whatever, you're buying utilities, you're dealing in Part 41. Section or subchapter G is contract management. Everything in here is basically after the award. We spend a ton of time putting contracts together, designing solicitations, evaluating them, negotiating them, and then I think sometimes the tendency is to put that thing on the shelf and move on to the next. But in fact, work is really only beginning there. So what happens if you got to go audit, a manufacturing plant? Let's say you're buying widgets and something's going wrong. What audit permissions do you have? What audit rights do you have? It's going to be talked about in Part 42. What if you need to modify a contract? A lot of times this happens. Sometimes it happens too often. Anecdotally, we used to talk about contract mods as sort of the eraser for anything we didn't do correctly in acquisition, planning. I learned later in my career that, while that might work internally inside government, that's actually a pretty big issue for contractors, because if something gets modified, they're going to incur costs to review that modification. It's inevitably going to have to go up for legal review. Consequently, and I'm not accusing anyone of anything, but sometimes contractors can use the contract modifications as a way to get whole, buying into a contract and then modifying the price. I'm not going to say it happens, but it happens. So Part 43, you need to understand your contract modification procedures and how those are all done. Part 44 deals with subcontracting policies and procedures. Subcontracting, obviously, a really big part of public sector contracting. Prime vendors will hire subs all the time because service delivery is complicated, and it's hard for a company to do everything all on their own. Government property deals with it. There is Part 45, government property, and inherently governmental property or equipment that's used in the delivery of the contract. You need to know who's responsible for it, who's liable for it, what happens when the contract's done. Quality assurance, Part 46. We're getting into like performance-based acquisition here and stuff, because if it's quality assurance, what's the quality assurance plan? If I'm entrusting a contractor to deliver in accordance with their, stated expertise, then what I have to do is make sure that they've got the quality controls in place to deliver. Transportation in Part 47, value engineering in Part 48. Those are pretty nuanced parts. They deal, if you're impacted by those, make sure you tune in to those sessions. Part 49 deals with the termination of contracts, and we know that there are two types of termination: default and convenience. The government has the right to both. When those clauses show up in your contract and you're a vendor, pays to know what their termination rights are and what can constitute default, which in the event of a default, you're going to have some other things to deal with. You potentially be debarred. But the government can also terminate for convenience any contract that they wish. Now, if they do that, you have rights. You have rights under a termination for convenience clause to be made whole for any obligations that you've incurred. So like I said, it pays to understand termination of contracts. Part 50 is the extraordinary contractual actions and the Safety Act. Part 51 is the use of government sources by contractors. Basically, this kind of means if you're working on a big systems integration contract, you're the integrator, you may have the opportunity to buy things on behalf of the government using government sources. So want to make sure you're paying attention there. Then we finally get into subchapter H, clauses and forms, Part 52 and Part 53. Part 52 is solicitation provisions and contract clauses. Every part of the FAR, pretty much every part of the FAR has associated clauses. So you're going to see those in Part 52. What's neat about Part 52 is, it's a huge section. I think if you were to hold up the desk version of the FAR and you would thumb to Part 52, I maybe even do that right now, it's going to be, well over half the book. But the way that the FAR is codified and structured, if you're talking about something that's Part 52.204, that's Part 2. If you're in something that's 52.212, Part 12 is commercial items, so that's a 52.212. That's going to be a clause related to commercial items, and that's just why I've always called the FAR pretty elegant text. And then finally, Section 53 is your forms, your standard forms, everything from the 1449s to audit requirements and how you actually conduct those. Those are all stated in your contract forms. Whew, okay, so that's the FAR. Let's talk a little bit about how it's actually broken down and codified, so I can stand behind the statement of an elegant outline. So if you look on the right hand of the screen here in Part 1, I just want to call out a few things. So you see your subparts there on the left. So you got subpart 1, that's actually section 1. You've got subpart 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, all the way down to 1.7. Within each subpart are sections. So you can see in subpart 1.1, there's a section 1.101. And then there's a section 1.102. Within each section are subsections. Subsection 102.1-1 all the way down to 102-4. Okay, it does go a little lower into paragraphs and subparagraphs. And so on the next slide, we can talk a little bit about how you can cite the FAR. So if we can go on to the next slide, I think that's my next slide is citations. It's either the next one or the one after. No, okay, so hold on. Let's put a peg on that. You might have heard me talk earlier when we were describing the federal acquisition system that I said the FAR does sort of legislate and govern the procurement of of our discretionary budget at all of our executive level agencies? Well, all of our executive level agencies, cabinet level agencies, also have supplemental regulations. So not only do you have to know the FAR, you've got to know the supplemental regulation for an agency, either that agency being your employer as a civilian, contracting professional, or your client as a government contractor. So, agriculture's got their AGAR. Homeland Security has their HSAR. Health and Human Services has their HHSAR. So this acronym soup's often pretty fun. Department of Veterans Affairs, they have their VA acquisition regulation. The important thing to know is that all of these supplemental regulations either supplement or implement the FAR, and they incorporate any agency policies, procedures, contract clauses, provisions, and forms that govern or inform or control the relationship between the agency and its contractors and vendors. So, like I said, very important for both contract professionals and contractors to ensure they comply with both the FAR and the agency supplements, along with any internal agency procedures. Let's show an example. Next slide, please. All right, so real quick before I get there, everybody has read paragraph 1.102D, right, which is a very important paragraph under the Statement of Guiding Principles for the Federal Acquisition System. And if you can click, Jennifer, to the next part, we'll just highlight this particular section. So your role, if you're a government professional, is to exercise, and part of that acquisition team, is to exercise your personal initiative and sound business judgment to provide the best value or a product or service to meet your needs. And in exercising this initiative, you're basically empowered to assume that if a strategy, or in other words, in layman's terms, if something that you want to do is not addressed in the FAR, but it isn't prohibited by law, then it's a permissible exercise of authority. So I highlight this in the context of supplemental regulations because it's not just the FAR, it's other regulation. And those other regulations would include the agency supplemental. So check one, does the FAR permit it, or does it at least not expressly prohibit it? No, okay, I'm good. Then you got to go and make sure that your agency supplemental doesn't prohibit that. And so that's a big part of Open the FAR's architecture. Our goal is to have each agency supplemental available side by side with the FAR text. So you can see in this particular screenshot, you can go ahead and click the next slide advance. We've got the FAR, the VAAR supplements. So the VAR is codified at chapter 800 of the Federal Register. So VAR 801.4 talks about deviations from the FAR or VAR. And so it's kind of convenient when you're using Open the FAR, if you're a VA contracting professional or you're doing business with VA, you'll be able to see whether or not there are any clarifying, supplemental, or implementing guidance for a particular part of the FAR from the VAR. And now you don't have to have several different tabs open on your screen, clicking back and forth to make sure that that doesn't exist. Next slide, please. All right. So this is just, again, this is talking about the individual deviations versus class deviations. Not going to get too deep into this because this is just really talking about the authority of the procurement executives at VA to execute any individual deviations from the FAR in the VAR or any class-wide deviations. So let's hop on to next. You can advance twice because it's just going to highlight the individual deviations. And then we can show an example illustrating why it's important to understand your agency supplementals on the next slide. Subpart 19.5. Earlier I talked about Part 19 being small business programs. Subpart 19.5 deals with set-asides for small businesses. If you are only reading the FAR and you were trying to enter contract with VA, or you were trying to execute a contract on behalf of VA, you might not understand that there is a deviation in the VAR from this subpart. And it's probably the most famous deviation that we have in public contracting today, because it deals with a rare occasion where a contract protest actually made its way to the Supreme Court. For FAR nerds and government contracting nerds like myself, this is historic. And it all sort of stemmed from this company, Kingdomware, earlier than that, Aldevra, that literally tried to sell pots and pans to VA VA facility, and VA did not buy them. These two companies, Kingdomware and Aldevra, were service-disabled, better-known businesses. VA, I think, I'm not going to perfectly relay the story, but VA effectively bought them from a non-SDVOSB. This was shortly after the Veterans First Contracting Act had come out. Aldevra and then later Kingdomware effectively sued for protest. Said no. Veterans First Contracting Act requires you to buy it from better-known companies first, and so there was this big legal review, right? Is VA required to buy from service-disabled, better-known businesses? Period. And eventually it was ruled that, yeah, they are. And so VA had to come in and modify through their VA acquisition regulation their rules for set-aside procedures. And now VA operates under this de facto rule of two, which you can read about in subsection 819.501-70, general principles for setting aside VA acquisitions. And you'll understand that set-asides first are mandatory for SDVOSBs and VOSBs whenever a contracting officer has a reasonable expectation of receiving two or more competitive quotes. So that's the rule of two within VA. And like I said, one of the more exciting Supreme Court cases for federal contracting professionals that we've seen in quite some time. But my bottom line here is that you need to know what your agency supplementals are conveying, and at least make sure that there's no informing language or implementing language. And we can go on to the next slide. Now is where I get to push up my glasses and tighten my bow tie and tell you about how to cite the FAR correctly. And I gotta attribute this to someone. You all might be familiar with Vern Edwards, but Vern is the smartest contracting expert I know. Ralph Nash, very close second. Anyway, Vern ran a class that I was fortunate to take called the FAR Boot Camp. And in that, one of the first lessons that Vern taught us was how to cite the FAR correctly. You might be rolling your eyes. Oh, why do I need to cite the FAR? Well, sound like a professional. If you're a contractor and you're talking to a contract professional and you know how to cite the FAR, and that contracting professional knows what they're doing, it's kind of like a head nod, like a respect type thing. Like, hey, I know how to talk about this. Vice versa. If you're a junior contracting specialist in the government and you're talking to your contracts attorneys, you're talking to a contract manager, it's been around the block a couple times and you know how to cite the FAR, yeah, you're going to be regarded a little bit differently potentially. So how do you do it? Well, fortunately, it's explained at subsection 1.105-2. So the FAR is arranged, like I've said, into parts, subparts, sections, subsections, paragraphs, and subparagraphs. The way that we know how to cite the FAR is basically, is there a decimal or not in the part that you're citing? If not, it's a part. If there's no decimal, if it's just 25, that's part 25. We call that FAR part 25. If there's a decimal, then we basically know how to cite it based on how far out the decimal extends. So if you just see 25.1 and there's no numerals beyond that, you're dealing with subpart 25.1. If you see 3 digits beyond that decimal, then you're in a section 25.108. That would be FAR section 25.108. If there's a dash and another decimal there, you're in a subsection. Subsection, technically, we're in the FAR right now, so I would be correct in saying subsection 25.108-2. But if I was describing this to my grandmother, I would have to say FAR part, or FAR subsection 25.108-2, and then she's inevitably going to ask me why I'm talking about the FAR here. But that's another story. Okay, so that's how. Now, I mean, there also are paragraphs, and so if there's a number next to that too, like if there was a parentheses A, then I would have to say, all right, we're in paragraph 25.108-2A. Okay, so if you learn this simple construct, I promise you it's not that hard, but it's always a way to impress people and make yourself look like a pro. All right, let's go on to the next slide. I'm going to start landing this plane. Oops, can we go up one more? Well, I think it's cat's out of the bag. Up, the prior slide, please. Okay, so I had a question here. Does the FAR apply to contractors? And I was going to make some smug comment about, you know, folks out there probably nodding their heads and saying, oh, of course the FAR applies to contractors. Yes, why wouldn't it? But in fact, it doesn't. Trick question though. It does in the sense that the clauses and provisions that are inserted into a contract then do bind the contractors and require your adherence. But no, the FAR only applies to government personnel who conduct acquisitions. However, there's something called the Christian doctrine. Another opportunity for me to push up my glasses and tighten my bow tie and get all FAR nerdy on you. The Christian doctrine basically says that, okay, because this is the context, right? So I just said that the FAR doesn't apply to you. Only the clauses and provisions that are inserted into your contract apply. That's true to a degree, because way back when there was a court case, and it was a guy named G.L. Christian who was a farmer. So it wasn't actually a Christian in the religious sense, but that was his last name. Anyway, the contract that he had entered into with the government lacked a very important clause at the mistake and the omission of the government. And basically, long story short, the omission of that clause would have opened up the government to some significant claim issue and set a precedent that they just could not abide, they being the government, the law. Okay, so the Christian doctrine basically says that if your contract lacks a statute, regulation, or clause that expresses a significant or deeply ingrained strand of public procurement policy, then it shall be read into a federal contract, even if it's not in the contract. So now I ask, does the FAR apply to contractors? The technical answer is no, but the answer that we need to operate on is, of course it does. What this means is, if you are signing a contract and you notice that it doesn't include, for instance, a termination clause, that's not an opportunity for you to run down the hall and say, oh my gosh, look, we're about to sign a contract that's got no termination clause. We can do anything we want. This is huge. Well, no, that's not the case, because if that ever did go to court, the government would just cite the Christian doctrine and read the termination clause into your contract, and then you'd have some explaining to do. Okay, so let me recap on the next slide. Some critical lessons here, the takeaways. As you're going to learn over the course of 2020 and get FAR cited, there's 53 parts divided into 8 subchapters, and each subchapter has sections, subsections, each part has subparts, sections, subsections, and paragraphs. You need to know how to navigate it to save yourself some time. If you're working on the desk reference, knowing where to generally flip to find your citation is useful. If you're working in openthefar.com, which I hope you'll consider, we have a pretty good search functionality. But it's always useful just to generally know how it's constructed, so you'll know generally what part to go to start your search. I've always said the FAR is kind of like a choose your own adventure thing. You'll find yourself reading a part, finding a dependent citation, clicking into that dependent citation, reading it, finding another dependency, and clicking into that. Pretty soon you don't even know where you started. So Open the FAR hopefully will provide some breadcrumbs and make that a little easier. At the very least, it allows you to preview a citation without clicking all the way in, so you can see if that actually applies or if that's just something to jog your memory. Do not ignore your agency supplements. Don't care what side of the ball you're on. You've got to know what the agency supplements have to say. on the implementing language. Cite it with professionalism using the construct that we just discussed. And again, that's at FAR subsection 1.105-2, subparagraph 1. Subparagraph B1, actually, I think is what I have to say. Yes, that would be subparagraph 1.105-2 B1. And then understand the Christian doctrine. Know that just because your contract may have an omission does not mean that it is omitted in the court's eyes. All right. Well, who is excited about 52 weeks of the FAR? I know I am, and I can't wait to deliver part 1 with you all in just a few short weeks. Jennifer, that's all I have. I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Super. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today, and thank you, Frank, for a great overview of the FAR. As you all know, we start the series the first Friday in January, and we'll continue most Fridays at 12 o'clock. They are all complimentary. There's limited space for these, so if you are interested in any parts, please sign up as soon as possible. All the recordings are usually posted within 2 to 3 hours of the presentation, and the same will hold true for today. So give us about 2 hours or so, and we'll have the recording up on our website and on our YouTube channel. We'll also post this on LinkedIn, and we'll tag Frank, so if you're connected to him, you'll be able to see that post. If you're connected to us, then you'll be able to see it as well. If not, you probably want to reach out to both of us on LinkedIn. And we welcome any feedback, any suggestions for future webinars, any content you guys want to see. And thanks again, everybody, for joining us. And thanks again, Frank.
Thank you.